Hello and welcome to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast. I'm Matt Adams alongside my good friend Mike Chappell. Dave Griffiths off again next week, and then after that you'll see a lot of Dave and not a lot of Mike because some of us need some vacation, right? Right, Mike?
Need some downtime.
We do have a good show for you today. We were going to talk a little bit about Jim Irsay and the Ring of Honor for the Colts. I don't think that's a big surprise that would happen. Chap and I kind of going to look at some strengths and weaknesses of the franchise, where we think the Colts are doing, where we think they improved, where we think that they've got some deficiencies. You'll probably be able to guess what those are based on our previous comments from the podcast. And then kind of a late edition, ESPN had a couple of their guys do an all NFL quarter century team. And they must have had their analytics jockeys on that because I do think there are some glaring omissions.
It's the eye test
of some players,
yes,
on that list. And always good fodder for sports radio discussion is who should be on this list, who shouldn't be on this
top
list.
100 players,
right? Top 100 players, right. All that. So it's an interesting thing. We'll get into it later. They did a 53-man roster, plus they stashed some guys on a practice squad under the current NFL roster rules. Their top coaches, I didn't really have much of a haggle with, but we'll talk about that a little later. First up, the Colts announced on Friday, which would have been Jim Irsay's 66th birthday, from what I understand, that he will be in the Ring of Honor. And I don't think that should really come as a surprise to anyone that he would be the next inductee. So that means on September 7th, when the Colts take on the Miami Dolphins in their home opener, they will put Mr. Irsay in the Hall of Fame. Kind of fitting. His father, Bob Irsay, was the first person to be inducted into the Ring of Honor. And so his son will then join him there.
Yeah, I think the day that he passed or the next day, I tweeted out that, how soon will he be in the Ring of Honor? And again, this is something that it's kind of weird because previously the Ring of Honor, who decided that? Well, Jim Irsay did. It was a vote. Right. It was a vote of one. I would always talk with Pete Ward. Said, Pete, what about? Well, he says, I'll check with the big guy about that. So, and now this is going in. He's going in as he should. I don't think there will be any concerns over it. Anybody complain about it. He was instrumental in football's rebirth here. Yes, Peyton Manning. Yes, I understand that. But yeah, it's a cool thing, and I'm curious again how it'll be done. I'm sure the daughters will be out there, but it's always a nice ceremony. All the Ring of Honor guys. Most of them come back for the ceremonies with Peyton and Marvin and Edgerrin and all these guys, Tariq Glenn. So it's a great honor, and it's just too bad he won't be here to enjoy it.
Was the Ring of Honor, was that his initiative,
I think so.
His idea?
I think so. And early on it was difficult because
wasn't a lot, right?
There wasn't a lot. I mean, remember the 12th man that got him in a court fight.
Right.
Bob Irsay, and the early ones were Bob Irsay and Bill Brooks and Jim Harbaugh, and now it's a case of, boy, who do you put in and what's the level? So, but the man that really made sure that football remained vibrant and relevant in Indianapolis, it's only fitting he goes in.
Just looking at the list, I put an article together this on Friday, and just looking at the list there, you're absolutely right. It starts with Robert Irsay, goes to Bill Brooks, Ted Marchibroda, Chris Hinton, obviously a great player for the franchise, and then Jim Harbaugh, 2005. There's a 4-year gap after that for Ring of Honor.
Because who?
Right. Who are you going to put in, right? And so that's when they inducted, at the time, the 12th man, but that is a registered trademark. So it is now Colts Nation that was
which
inducted.
Was a reach. Which was a reach. We need something to put in there. So
right. Who can we put in? We'll put in our fans, right? Then it's Dungy, Marvin Harrison, Edgerrin James. They put Eric Dickerson and Marshall Faulk in the same year back in 2013. Then Jeff Saturday, Bill Polian, Peyton Manning, Reggie Wayne, Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathis, Tariq Glenn. Dallas Clark was the most recent inductee last season. So a lot of the usual suspects there for the Indianapolis Colts. And now Jim Irsay will join them, and then we'll have to have the conversation who next from the playing field will deserve to be in that.
Yeah, Colts the T.Y. Hiltons, the Bob Sanders. Those are the two. Adam Vinatieri jumps out, which however you what. So they got people like on deck and in the bullpen. So we just have to see what order they want to do it.
Yeah, and there were some years where they had guys almost every year, and then there's some years where they had gaps. I think the biggest gap was when they when they inducted the fan base. So a deserving honor there for Jim Irsay to join his father and his franchise in the Colts Ring of Honor. Again, that will be happening. I wasn't clear, Chap. Is that going to be a halftime ceremony, or are they going to do that?
They do that
game?
Halftime.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
So I thought they usually did, but I had read somebody had said they'd do it before the game, and I'm like, I don't.
Well, maybe, but the problem doing it at halftime is it takes X number of minutes to set up the stage, and then you do the video, and then the guy you're inducting has got like 30 seconds.
Right, now it's time for kickoff, right?
Right.
Kickoff
So and Jim Irsay could not do 30 seconds on his own. So, but no, it's normally halftime, and I assume they'll do it the same way.
And it's not like the NFL, the Super Bowl, where you've got as much time as you want essentially for halftime.
It's a limited time.
You've got a limited window.
Right.
All right. So one of our main topics this week is, we have reached sort of what is a dead season or a dead period in news.
The NFL hasn't figured out how to make it a 12-month project. So this is this dead period.
So we're in this period where, we had OTAs, we had the veteran minicamp, and aside from maybe a veteran free agent signing, the last draft pick being signed for the Colts, their second round pick, JT Tuimoloau. There we go. Got it this week. Aside from those bits of news, maybe adding or some sort of awful off-season injury or some sort of legal thing, there's not a whole lot. And it makes it difficult for the content creators, doesn't it, Mike, to find stuff to talk and to write about.
It is, because generally the only news that comes out of this time of the calendar is something bad.
Right.
2 o'clock in the morning, they were out drinking or in a car accident or whatever. So, and that's the last thing that a coach always says to players. Listen, you know what to do. Take care of yourself. Rest up the body and have a good time. But I don't want to get that call at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So the only news is going to be when they sign the second round pick, and then they'll release the training camp schedule. So they're done until they report July 22nd to Grand Park, practice the next day. So I still hope they sign another player or two. I think they need help in a couple of spots. But by and large, this is your 2025 Indianapolis Colts, and good or bad.
You don't even get any media availabilities where they just randomly bring out Steichen for a week or something like that.
And coaches are prohibited from having, football contact with these guys. This is how it's structured. And players probably want more downtime. And there's been talk about getting rid of almost all the OTAs and reporting to camp a little bit earlier, and I don't think that'll ever happen. So this is that one stretch. When I was at the Indy Star, I always took my 4 weeks vacation, last 2 weeks of June, first 2 weeks of July, because there's just nothing going on, and we're good enough. We can manufacture stuff,
right? But
it just serves no purpose, and we'll give everybody a chance to sort of catch their breath, catch up on some baseball if you're so inclined. And because once you get going late July, you're busy until you hope late January, or if you're really fortunate, early February.
If you are a baseball fan, the Cincinnati Reds are surging a little bit.
38-35.
We'll see if they can keep that going.
They're teasing.
Tempting, right? They've got talent.
But I followed them forever. And I was fortunate enough when I worked at Anderson as the sports editor, and I covered the World Series down there. Was it Boston in the mid-'70s with the big red machine? And God, that was fun. But I keep waiting for them to have that one good year and not just be 5 above, 5 below 500 or much worse. So they're fun to keep track of.
All right. So one of our main topics, we're going to talk about the strengths where we view, at least as the current roster currently stands before the season, before we really even know anything about this football team, about the strengths and weaknesses of the Indianapolis Colts as Chap sees them and as I see them, and whether or not we're crazy or we agree or disagree or what have you. So, Mike, we're going to put you on the hot seat first. Where do you see one of the strengths of this ball team?
Just one, or you want my top 3 or whatever?
Go ahead and give them. We can debate.
I've sort of got defensive line, wide receiver, and then I've got running back.
Okay.
And if I had to have a fourth, I'd put offensive line. I'm a little cautious because they're replacing 2 guys, and they're replacing them with 2 second-year players. Yes, who played well last year, but they're second-year players, and I worry about the depth if you have an injury. But D-line, they've just done such a good job of having proven bodies. Depth is they're going to play 8 or 9, 7 or 8 every game, and they always want to have, beyond your 4 starters, that 3 or 4 guys who in a pinch they're starters. And I think the key to this, you're going to get 8 sacks from Buck because he always gives you 8 sacks. Kwity Paye has sort of hit that ceiling on 8 sacks. Samson Ebukam's a wild card, but you know what you got with Grover. And Tyquan Lewis, I think he's got another year or 2 in him. But the key is going to be Latu. It just is. If he can take that next step, I think they've got a chance to be a pretty good line. And what's funny is Jared Verse of the Rams was Defensive Rookie of the Year. Mm-hmm. And if you put his stats next to Latu's, Verse had 4.5 sacks, 11 tackles for loss, and 18 quarterback hits. Latu had 4 sacks, 5 tackles for loss, and 12 quarterback hits. I think Verse had more constant pressure. I think his pressure rate was higher. But it's not like Latu had a bad year. We talked to him last week, I think it was, and he was like so close to a lot of sacks. I'm not sure how many. Let's put a number on it, but it's maybe in year 2 when he's not thinking as much and he's reacting and he shaves that millisecond off. Then he gets home more often. So I like the defensive line. Again, Ebukam, who's coming off the Achilles, but had, a career high 9 sacks or whatever it was 2 years ago, team high. He could give you something. Wide receiver, it's a good, solid group. We've talked. I would like to have a stronger number 1, but only so many. There's only so many Justin Jeffersons and Jamar Chases and that. So I think Pittman's is really good. He's not great. They had, as far as the depth, they had 3 guys last year with 800 yards or more: Pitt, Pierce, and Downs. Second time in franchise history that's happened. Just second time. First, the only other time was in 2004 when Stokely, Marvin, and Reggie all had 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns.
So that was the year that Peyton ran off.
Right. So I like the group. That 3, Mitchell. God, he reminds me of Ben Mather, and you just don't know. You see the incredible talent, but you don't know. And Ashton Doolin gives you a good 5. Anthony Gould, maybe you don't know. He's more of a kick return guy. And then running back, depth is a concern because after Taylor, who? I mean, they've got people, Giddens and Herbert and all these guys, but they're going to ride Taylor. They're just going to ride Taylor. And I saw a note that he is one of like 3 players who's averaged 100 yards a game over in 2 of his first 5 seasons. And the other 2 were, I wish I couldn't find it again, Peyton and Jim Brown. I don't know who. But since he got in the league in 2020, he's 2nd in rushing yards to Derrick Henry. He's 3rd in attempts, and he's 2nd to Henry in yards per game, 89.7. So don't tell me about the one drop, the fumble at Denver. We all have things we'd like to get rid of. This guy's a talent. They're wasting an all-pro level talent by not getting the quarterback situation settled. So my 3 are D-line, receiver, and running back, and offensive line would be 4th probably because I just don't trust right now. And again, I think Pro Football Focus has them one of the top offensive lines in the league. But I just have questions about the 2 guys they're having to replace.
Well, it's just one of those issues where you've lost 40% of your offensive line,
right?
And one of them, longtime franchise staple at center for Ryan Kelly, and then Will Fries didn't play a super long time here, but he was impactful when he played, and it looked like he had played himself into a big contract before he got hurt. Turns out he got hurt, and he had still played himself into a big contract. So definitely offensive line was one that I had thought of. I didn't put it on my list. I went defensive line as well because it's a good group. It's an experienced group. You've got Buck in there. You've got Grover Stewart, Kwity Paye, all those guys you mentioned. And then you've got the high ceiling with Latu. You don't know where that could go. And the wild card, as you mentioned, Samson Ebukam. Like if Samson Ebukam is able to come back and play at a pretty good level.
Situational pass rusher. Right. That's what he's going to be.
Right. If he can play at a good level, recovering from an Achilles injury, which we have some skepticism on just based on that particular injury because we've seen it. That becomes a pretty strong group. They added Neville Gallimore for some depth there. Eric Johnson, who was a guy that obviously they were pretty high on because they had drafted him and they've decided to bring him back. So it's a really good experienced group. You've got Lewis in there, as you mentioned as well. And I really like the defensive line group. Wide receiver, also, it's absurd to think after doing a couple of this podcast for a few years that we would consider wide receiver to be a position of strength because for many, many, many years, it was not for the Colts. But give GM Chris Ballard some credit here. They went out, they got Pittman. They drafted Pierce. They went and got Josh Downs. And now they've got Mitchell there. Doolin is that steadying factor, that kind of Swiss Army knife that you can use. He's a very great special teams player, can be useful in the offense. And then you hope that maybe, a sixth guy emerges there. I think that's a really good group. I think it's a rock solid group. It's not a dynamic group of receivers, but it is really good. And it has the chance to be a dynamic group.
We've seen it when we watched practice. You saw a much quicker Michael Pittman because last year it was your admiration for him really grew last year by how he played through that back injury.
That was miserable for him.
And now you see just a much quicker player, which obviously will. So he's got a lot to prove to himself because he wants to be that guy that's a top 10 player at his position, which right now I don't think he is. But it's a solid group. If you're as bad as your weakest player, right now their weakest player probably is Mitchell because you just haven't seen the consistency. Right. It's a good group.
Yeah, I'm bullish on the wide receiver group that the Colts have. The one that I added secondary in there, which is another thing that shocks me that we're going into a season with the Colts and we're talking about the secondary. And then the reason is because they invested in this group. They added Mooney Ward, they added Cam Bynum. Lou Anarumo is a guy who values his secondary. Not that all defensive coordinators don't, but especially the safety position. But you look there and again, health will be the big issue there. But you've got Jalen Jones, who's been pretty solid as a young player for them. You've got Kenny Moore, just a dynamic player. And I think this system that Anarumo is going to use Kenny Moore.
It's going to be like it was with Flus in how they really focus and maximize Kenny Moore's skill
Let him fly off the corner because you don't do it every play because it won't work every play. But man, situationally use that. I think that's something that's been missing from the Colts defense for the last couple of years. And then, Juju Brents, all-world talent, all-world athlete. If the health is there, this is getting really, really good group. Then you have Nick Cross there at the other safety spot as well.
Right.
So again, they like Justin Wally that they brought in from the rookie class and also Hunter Wohler as well, who I had to laugh. I was looking over the roster today and some guys are listed as cornerbacks. Some guys are listed as safeties. Wohler, who they said was drafted as a linebacker, but really is a safety for them that they're going to use, or kind of a hybrid player.
Right.
He's listed as a defensive back.
There you go.
And he is the only player on the roster that is listed as just a defensive back. Everyone else is either a corner or a safety. So that kind of tells you what the Colts think of him and his role here in the defense.
Well, they announced him as a linebacker when they drafted him.
Right.
And we were talking, I don't think it's talking out of school, but it was because they had some safeties they wanted to sign as undrafted players. So if you say that the guy you just drafted is a linebacker, then it shows maybe you still need safeties.
Right.
So, but they think he's got versatility, and they're going to play, and we'll get to it, the reason why. They're going to play a lot of DBs. They just are. There's going to be more sub packages for these guys. Maybe because that's what they want to do. In my mind, it's because of one of my weaknesses.
So let's go ahead and go into that weakness. And I think I know exactly where you're going with this,
It's the top
Mike.
of my list.
Yeah, go ahead. Go right on.
It's linebacker. It just is. Their starting linebackers have taken virtually no snaps in the offseason. I don't think Carlisle's got out there in actual practice. He's coming back. Jalen Carlisle is coming back from shoulder surgery.
Is he a little ahead in his rehab compared to Zaire?
The surgery was quicker now. The difference in the surgeries, I'm not a doctor, but then Zaire missed off-season work because of ankle surgery, cleanup procedure, which, whatever. Hopefully they're both ready for training camp. But that's the extent of their proven depth. And Carlisle's depth is from a rookie. So, Zaire Franklin is as good as it gets at his position. I was looking, the stat that just jumps out at me, he's got 65 career starts. The other linebackers have 16 to 18 among them. And 8 of them are by Jacob Phillips, who no one would know if they had, if it had a lineup with him. So, Segan Alubi 2 starts. So it's and Jalen Carlisle's had 6. So it's a group that I really thought that they would make a push during the offseason to add Jermaine Pratt.
Right, from Cincy.
Jumped out, and I would have what he signed with, was it the Raiders?
Yes, it was with
$4.5 million. I thought, holy smokes, why not?
When it's such a glaring, again, it's us as looking on the outside looking in, but man, it just looks like that's something that jumps off the page. And if you looked at a lot of the pre-draft stuff, we were not alone in that assessment. A lot of people had the Colts, if they didn't go first round with tight end, then maybe picking a linebacker or moving up in the second round to maybe get a guy. And they there was must not have been a guy on the board that they really wanted to do that.
Chris Ballard mentioned that once you got past the first few guys, there was a huge drop off.
Right, and there were some excellent linebackers in the draft. The problem is they all went right, and so they didn't want to reach to go and get anybody, and that's kind of where they landed.
But I think the reason that the linebacker is to me deficient, they're going to play more extra DBs, which is fine. But to me, it's more of a fact of this is what our roster allows us to do, as opposed to this is what we want to do.
Kind of have to do it that way,
you have to play linebackers for crying out loud. So and heaven forbid if one of them gets dinged up. I mean, Zaire Franklin, he's durable. He plays. Jalen Carlisle's had the injury last year that he played through.
Right.
My second area, I broke it down. My second area of weakness is safety. I broke it down instead of DBs because I really like the fact they went out and got Bynum and Nick Cross. And then what have you got? I mean,
no. I mean, that's a fair point. If you put them together as a unit, pretty good. But if you take them and you separate them as safety and
because right now
it's not as convincing.
Your third safety is Rodney Thomas.
Right, Rodney Thomas.
They like Daniel Scott,
but he's injured.
He's had major. I think it was an ACL and an Achilles.
Yep,
I think it
was.
And one thing I noticed is you mentioned going out and spending on the secondary with Bynum and Charvarius Ward, both $60 million contracts, which is something they simply don't do.
Right.
I think this has the potential to be their best safety corner combination. I was looking since Vontae Davis and Mike Adams. They were both Pro Bowlers in 2014 and 2015. I don't know who else I'd put in the mix. That they've sometimes, like Stephon Gilmore, who was the safety, Julian Blackman. So I like the combination. They're proven. They're veterans. Ward's been in the Super Bowl a bunch. So I like the group. I have serious concerns about the depth at safety. You can only, and it's crazy. You're right that we're boosting the strength of a receiver, which we seldom have done. And corner. They got a bunch of good corners.
Yes, they do.
And again, Juju is a wild card. He knows he's got to stay on the field. When we talked to him that last week, you stand next to him, and he's what you want. He's got length. He's probably 6'2". He's got the length. He's aggressive, but he has had trouble staying healthy. So he's another wild card like Ebukam is. And my third area is one that was a weakness coming in as tight end. I just can't say it's a strength because they got Tyler Warren, because the rest of the group is totally deficient in some area. I mean, Mo Ali Cox I like Mo. We've seen his ceiling for the last 2 or 3 years, and right now he's going to give you 15 catches and a ton of blocking. And then what do you have? Will Mallory, Jelani Woods, Drew Ogletree, guys who you need to be better. You need to stay healthy. Jelani Woods has had the injuries. So I think that's a group that maybe I'm underselling Tyler Warren's addition, although I think he's going to have a fabulous rookie season. But as a group, I'm concerned about the total group at tight end.
Well, and it's funny because, I mean, if we were doing this podcast 3 years ago, we talked about they had all these guys in the tight end room. They were all young guys. There was a lot of potential there. You know, you had Granson, you had Ogletree, you had Jelani Woods.
Draft picks. Right.
You know, but they were all young kids. They were all draft picks. And because of injuries in various situations, they did not develop. And Granson just did not. He had a role in the offense that just could not capture it, you know? And so it's kind of funny because I think a couple years ago we would have looked at this because of the young youth and the potential. We would have said this was a strength of the team, but we've seen some of that youth kind of work its way out and play a few years, and we don't see it as big of a strength. But then obviously Tyler Warren does change everything for the group. But I don't have any problem seeing it with that either, because beyond that, then you're like, what else do you have? If he gets nicked up, you don't have anybody. That's
then you're back to where you were pre-draft.
Exactly. You're exactly right back where you were. So I had linebacker on that list. You know, it's kind of like we've talked about on this podcast before. When you have the salary cap, you can't have everything. Right. So you have a budget. You have to cut somewhere. Clearly, linebacker is kind of the position group where the Colts have cut some corners there.
And they've not re-signed some pretty good players.
And not re-signed some guys. It's not one that – and this really kind of goes back to the Polian era even. And now they played a different system then, but they just kind of weak side linebacker. They just kept plugging and playing guys for several years, and they were all very productive because of the spot.
But Marcus Washington, Mike Peterson, guys like that, they played them through their rookie contracts, and then they moved on.
And they move on to the next
because if they're not great players, you just can't re-sign them.
Right. So, you know, they're going to rely on Segun Alubi and Cameron McGrone and Liam Anderson for depth here. And, you know, those players, maybe one of them has a breakout year. But really the only thing they've added to that group is Joe Bacci from the Bengals. And from my understanding, excellent special teams guy. Kind of a decent fill-in spot starter, if you will, kind of like Grant Stewart was, but not quite as good as Grant Stewart.
I wish they had re-signed Grant Stewart.
Yeah, absolutely. You feel better about the group, right?
Limited as a linebacker. He's going to get you tackles, not much in coverage, but you knew what you were going to get with him. Maybe they simply wanted more, but I don't see that they got more from what they've done in the offseason.
It's either a 1-to-1 or there's a drop-off here. And I have a feeling that it might be a little bit of drop-off. But then again, maybe Lou Anarumo, being more familiar with Bacci, knows something that I don't. Maybe he has a bigger, better role in mind.
But he didn't start him in Cincy.
No, he didn't start him in Cincy.
He had two starts. So he knows him, and maybe it's one where, again, you know a player's strengths and weaknesses, which you should.
Right, you should, yes.
So I think they know what they're getting. I would not be opposed. I didn't look at the list. I wouldn't be opposed to still bringing in a veteran linebacker.
There's still a few out there.
Right.
We talked about a couple of them last week or a couple of weeks ago, and they have kind of gone in and out of my head. But I'm sure we could find a list of that and take a look at that. A couple of things that, you know, I put in Placekicker as a team weakness. And, you know, when they signed Matt Gay, we saw this as a position of strength, and this is all cyclical about how rosters change and how teams evolve over the years. But when they signed Matt Gay to the big contract, we looked at this as a position of strength. They finally solved their kicker situation. Well, unfortunately, that went south, started to go south a little bit at the end of 2023, inconsistent in 2024. So they ended up cutting very expensive and still a very good kicker. I'm not saying that he's not good, but he struggled.
Who did he sign with? Washington?
I believe so, yes. Yeah. And so they decided to go with youth at kicker. And so you've got Spencer Schrader, a second-year player who played at Notre Dame. And then you've got, Trujillo, Maddox Trujillo as a rookie coming in and kicking. These are guys that both have big legs. They can be explosive in the kicking game when you're talking about distance. But can they be consistent in the kicking game when you need them? And really, let's face it, a lot of games come down to last-second kicks, don't miss the extra point, that sort of thing, and you need consistency there. And I'm not saying these guys aren't good kickers, but we've got a kicker competition. One of them is going to win it, and then it's kind of a question mark to see where that's going to go. And I just kind of feel like when you've got such a big question mark at that position, I know it's not wide receiver, and I know it's not, offensive line, or it still has an impact on the game. And as good as the Colts are at some of their other specialty positions, like their long snapper, Luke Rose, rock solid, Rigoberto Sanchez, one of the best positional or directional kickers in the game for the Colts, then you look and you've kind of got a big question mark at that other big position at place kicker. So I had that down as a weakness.
I've always thought that, like Chris Ballard harping and correctly that competition is good. I've always thought open competition is not good at quarterback and place kicker. I'd like to know what I've got there. But it's clear that they weren't satisfied with Matt Gay being 95% from 49 in, but 40% or whatever it was from 50 on.
He needed more from distance, and it looked like he was going to be a good distance kicker for them.
Well, that's what he was with the Rams,
right?
He came here with whatever it was, 16 for 22, whatever it was, and they just, whenever it got past 50, 49, you just didn't know. And if your head coach doesn't trust your kicker when you get around the 40-yard line, I don't know. It just impacts your play calling. It just does. And they weren't willing to continue the course and see if it corrected itself.
And when it starts to affect how you do your long-term game planning and how you react in, the situations where you get the ball past the 50,
right,
then you have to do something.
Right.
And what the Colts decided was, you know what? We paid this guy a lot of money. It's not working out for us to get what we need out of him. So we're just going to get a little bit of a savings, because it did save a little bit of money against the cap, a little bit of dead money too, because of the contract.
This might be more of a accountability thing than money. I mean, because again, when they signed Gay to was it 4 years, $22 million, whatever it was, and people said, "Well, look what you're paying." I'm thinking it's a kicker, and in terms of a roster budget, that's not that massive. But at the same time, I think it's accountability, and if you're not measuring up to what they want you to do, what they need you to do, they're going to make a change.
And the fact that it also does save them some money,
right.
Probably also
yes.
does, because Schrader and Trujillo are not going to cost them what they were paying Matt Gay, which was a large contract for a kicker.
No question.
Again,
it was the second or third highest for a kicker in the league.
Right. Yeah. Just behind at the time, I think he was second to Justin Tucker.
Right.
I think when he signed
I don't think
contract.
Butker was up there, but Tucker was.
Right. Yeah. So I had that, and then obviously, I don't know if this is a weakness or just gigantic question mark, because you could put that under.
This is what. Go ahead.
Quarterback. I don't know. This is not a position of strength. It may not be a position of weakness. But because when you talk about open competitions, not great at kicker, killer at quarterback, right? And so I have no idea what the Colts look like.
But that should mean it's a position of weakness.
Right, exactly.
If you don't know. And then you go into the offseason with Anthony Richardson not throwing the football. So, yeah, I could put it on there, and I probably should have put it on there, but just because you don't know.
And I think it's kind of one of those things where it's such an obvious thing that it's a weakness for the Colts, because it's just one gigantic question mark as to whether it's going to be Anthony Richardson, supremely athletically gifted, but not quite coming together on the passing game, or whether it's going to be Daniel Jones, who, in all honesty, is kind of a reclamation project for the Colts.
You could argue they both are.
They both are reclamation projects, and they've got some similar athletic traits. Obviously, Richardson, from a pure athletic standpoint, way, way, way ahead of Jones, but he's no slouch. Jones is no slouch on that stuff.
It's funny. They've got two quarterbacks who hold their team's single-season rushing record. Richardson with the Colts, and then Jones with the Giants, which it's a great aspect of your game to have. But, everything that we've talked about, and I mention this every time we talk about the roster, is none of this matters unless the quarterback works.
Doesn't matter if Josh Downs and Alec Pierce and A.D. Mitchell, Michael Pittman Jr., doesn't matter how great of a group that is if you can't get them the football.
Well, it doesn't matter if Jonathan Taylor rushes for 1,800 yards and 20 touchdowns like he did in 2021 if the quarterback play isn't up to snuff. More went into it, obviously, but that they don't. And when we get back from vacation, we can do a whole podcast on. They don't need Pro Bowl, All Pro quarterbacking. They simply don't.
Just need competent quarterback
they just
play.
Make the plays, make an occasional big play that Richardson will do, but complete whatever your Mendoza line is. 58. I would think it should be 62, 63%. I'm not putting that on Richardson. I don't think he's capable of that. Jones is, but do your job. Stay away, limit the mistakes and let the people around you. This is Pro Football Focus has the Colts roster ranked 20th, which is not too bad. But a lot of the reason that they've got them that low is the question at quarterback. But again, I think there's a lot of good areas of strength or of not weakness that way that we've talked about. But the biggest question at quarterback, and the worst news we got is when they announced that Richardson experienced soreness in his shoulder. I think it was May 21st. It was. I shouldn't know these dates, but I do when it's a quarterback. And they hope he's ready to start throwing in training camp, but you don't know. And then you don't know if he starts throwing August 1st, is he good to go? Or do they, Shane Steichen said they'll ease him in. Well, at what point will he just, okay, the restrictions are off and now you go practice. You throw the ball on Wednesday and then you throw the ball on Thursday. So whenever the quarterback situation is questionable, you have major questions going forward.
And I think that makes this Indianapolis Colts team so intriguing, because if you look at the roster from top to bottom on a positional basis, really the only thing that sticks out is linebacker. Right. Because I made the argument for kicker, just because they're moving on. You got a couple of young guys. It's more of an uncertainty than a weakness. But quarterback, because it is the most important position in probably all of professional sports, is quarterback. If you don't have a guy who is the guy, then you're not going to be a successful team.
Right. So, Ted Martirossi told us way long ago, if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. And that's kind of where they are now. And we're not going to know. And the worst thing that is going to happen is that maybe Richardson is not quite ready to go full bore until late August. And then what do you have? Then you've got Daniel Jones. And then you start Daniel Jones into the season, and then Richardson's getting healthy. Then what do you do if Jones is playing well? It's not a good situation. Ideally, Richardson is healthy enough at the start of camp to where there's actually open competition, and one of these guys flat out wins the competition. You go into the season with this guy. He plays well enough to where you're not looking over your shoulder, or the first bad quarter, you're saying, well, is the other guy going to play? Again, when you have that guy, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Mahomes, Peyton Manning, Brady, you just knew no game was unwinnable. I went through the Manning career, experienced it, and there were no games that were unwinnable. You're down 35-14 with 5 minutes to play, and they won. Now that was an aberration, but and if you don't have the guy, it is just so hard because every other thing has to work, and there's no room for the defense to give up 25 points or to overcome 3 turnovers. I hope it works out for a lot of reasons, because if it doesn't work out, if this season goes south, there will be changes, and the changes will be massive, maybe down to the studs type of changes. And the only way to avoid that, with I'm not saying new ownership, but with new direction at the top, is to be successful, make the playoffs, and then reevaluate from there.
And I just have this feeling that it's going to be Daniel Jones on opening day. And the thing is, with a competent supporting cast, which honestly the guy didn't have in New York.
It's like the Giants said, how hard can we make this on our quarterback?
Right. And they made it very, very hard.
Right.
And then when it kind of went south for him, then, they didn't want to do any more with him.
But he had a decent surrounding cast in 21, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, at least Barkley ran for 1,400 yards, and they made the playoffs. I did some research, and up until this past year with the Giants, where they had Neighbors had whatever, he had 1,000 yards, whatever, plus the most receptions by a Jones receiver was like 66, and the most yardage was like 700.
Oof.
So, that's what we said all along with Richardson is give him a good supporting cast and take that excuse out of the mix. Now it's up to him to stay healthy and perform. But I have more confidence in, and this is an indictment of Richardson, I have more confidence in Jones being that steadying force than I do Richardson. I just do. And I've not seen him play one game in person, Jones. Right. So, it needs to be Richardson, like we talked about, for a lot of reasons. Certainly with this injury with Richardson that kept him out of the last 2 weeks or whatever, or 3 weeks of camp, it's going to make it hard for him to catch up. And then if Jones starts, which he probably will, if I'm a betting man, he probably will. And if he plays well and you're winning, the first part of the schedule is conducive to winning. It just is. Then you've got yourself internally issues because you've got the 4th overall pick in the draft sitting there not playing. But you've got to play the best guys. You owe it to the roster. You owe it to Buckner and Quentin and everybody else to play the best guy to win now. And not these players in this locker room outside of Richardson don't care about next year. They don't. So they'll put the best quarterback on the field. It needs to be Richardson. I think it might be Daniel Jones.
Player development takes a backseat to winning.
Yes.
Right?
Survival.
Right.
All of us are day to day. A lot of the coaches and players are week to week and year to year when it comes to their, there's no loyalty in sports. You either play and you win or you move on.
And
so
if they do bring in a guy, and obviously they've got Jonathan Taylor back there, and he's able to run like he's been able to run, and you've got a guy who can complete 65% of the passes, pick up a first down on a 3rd and 6 situation, keep those chains moving. Going to be very hard to justify changing that.
And have the defense play at a top 12, 15 level.
Right.
Then this team's got a chance.
So it'd be really interesting. I know that Daniel Jones certainly has his supporters among the fan base. Anthony Richardson, there's still a lot of people tantalized by his athleticism that want to see if he can improve. And thankfully, thanks to Richardson's injury here in OTAs and minicamp, we are no closer to having any answers on how this is all going to shake out. So,
and a lot of the sentiment, the pro Jones sentiment, is that he's not Richardson.
Right.
He said, well, I've seen him for 2 years. Let's see what this guy can do. Yeah. And again, what sort of sparks that optimism is like Sam Darnold. Look what Darnold did when he got to a fresh start. I'm not saying the Colts roster is as good as what the Vikings put around Darnold, but this is so much better than anything that Jones saw in New York. So that gives you a reason for optimism that if the offensive line plays well, which we'll see, then there's a chance for one of these guys to play at a winning level, and a winning level for however many games, 15, 17. It's hard for a quarterback to stay healthy for 17 games. Do your job and let people around you do their jobs.
Again, a story that we're going to just pound into the ground because that's the franchise.
That's the story. That's the story.
That's the story for the team.
We said this back. We've been saying this for months. This will be the predominant story. I don't care if Jones has a great preseason and he's the starter and he's completing 80% of his passes. It's still going to be into the season. Once there's a hiccup, whatever, how do you not play Richardson? What are you going to do with him next year? It's always going to be the dominant story because of how it's been put together and because of the way Richardson has struggled for 2 years.
All right. You're watching the Colts Blue Zone Podcast on Fox 59 Now, YouTube, and on your appropriate podcast app. Thank you for watching as usual. All right, Mike, one more topic here as we cascade toward the end of the show. I talked about a little bit at the top. ESPN put together the all NFL quarter century team. It's a list of 53 players. They also did a coaching staff. They used 17 practice squad players as well. And the criteria was basically a player could play in the 90s, but this is all based on their production from the year 2000 onward. So they're purely into the 21st century as far as things go here. They had 25 offensive players, 23 defenders, 5 special team guys, plus the 17 guys that they stashed and some arbitrary things as well. 2 Colts made the list. I don't think there's too much argument on both of these guys being in there. They're Hall of Famers. They were all-timers for the Colts. That would be Peyton Manning and Marvin Harrison on that list. Other than that, no other Indianapolis Colts players on here. I do think there are a couple of glaring omissions. Now, it's not all based on on-field production and championships and all of that. Those play a role into it, but they did use some advanced metrics in how a player impacts a game and such. I don't know how to do the advanced metrics for some of the players, but I do feel they had Tom Brady on the list. I got no arguments with that. You got Patrick Mahomes, maybe a little bit of recency bias there, but I really don't think so. He's been a generational talent in the NFL. Where I did raise a little bit of an eyebrow was when I looked at the running back group. And again, these are not bad players that they chose for this team.
First thing we need to say, when we're saying this guy over that guy, we're not saying the guy we don't want is a bad player. It's just we thought, and I kind of, that struck me too, is you can't be serious.
Yeah.
And it's nothing against a player that I thought, are you serious?
Yeah. So they went with Priest Holmes, who was an amazing player in the early 2000s for the Chiefs. Won a Super Bowl with the Ravens, actually. So they went with him. They went with Christian McCaffrey and then Derrick Henry for their 3 running backs for this quarter century team. And I don't know. King Henry, I don't really think I could argue with that too much. He's been a good player. He's not won a title or anything like that, but neither has McCaffrey, who has also struggled with injury. And Priest Holmes, he was dominant for a period of years, hardly unlike anybody, but it was a very short stint. And when you look at his career numbers, they pale in comparison to some of the guys. Like they stashed LaDainian Tomlinson on the practice squad.
First ballot Hall of Famer.
On this team. And Tomlinson, I mean, he had more rushing yards in his, again, I know there are some analytics in play and all this, but he had more rushing yards, just in rushing yards, than any of these 3 guys had in all-purpose yards. So, and then you add his receiving yards on top of that, and he had 145 career rushing touchdowns, Mike. We're going to stash him on the practice squad?
When I saw the list, I would beat the drum loudly for Edgerrin James, Hall of Famer. Was it 4 1,500-yard seasons? And after saying that, I would have been drowned out, rightfully so, by LaDainian Tomlinson. I mean, if you're starting teams, and I love Edgerrin James, I do. But LT just gave you something more. With the receptions and the all-purpose yards, so I don't understand. Christian McCaffrey, you talked about
recency bias, 100%.
He's had 3 fantastic seasons, probably. Well, Tomlinson had like 10 or 11. Edgerrin had 7 or 8, and I just, if I'm drafting running backs from the first quarter of the century of the 2000s. McCaffrey's he's not on my list, the top 5. He just isn't.
Yeah, I did not get that. I mean, again, he's not a terrible player.
Right.
I'm not saying he sucks and he should never be on an NFL all-time team or anything like that. It's just when you look at some of the other guys that are not here, another guy that easily, and he wasn't as dynamic of a receiver, and I think that probably plays here into some of their analytics, but Adrian Peterson. I mean, that guy was as dominant.
He might be a first ballot Hall of Famer in the next 2 years.
I know he had some off-the-field problems and all that, but we're talking on-field production. You're talking about one of the great all-time running backs there. I feel like LaDainian Tomlinson, Adrian Peterson, Edgerrin James, all worthy of a spot over a couple of guys that they ended up with here on this.
the McCaffrey thing, again, he's had those 2 or 3 fantastic seasons. He just has. But I would argue strongly for Edgerrin James, and knowing that there's a stronger argument for LT. That's the one that jumped out. I mean, there were a few more, and we'll get to it, but that one I thought, are you crazy?
Receivers, I didn't have too many problems with receivers. You've got Randy Moss in there, Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones is in there, Terrell Owens, Marvin Harrison, of course,
Right.
in there, Justin Jefferson in there. And, of course, you look at his numbers, they pale in comparison to some of those other guys, but man, he's had a really good run.
Right.
And you would expect that that's going to continue, so I could kind of see, why he's there. One guy I thought perhaps was left off the list for me, Larry Fitzgerald. Now, this list also probably accounts for some winning and effect on the game. And the teams that Larry Fitzgerald played for were never very good, unfortunately, for him. But as far as he goes, he had the most yards, more yards, receiving yards than any of those guys. He did it for a very long time. He was consistent. And the only guy on this list that they put out that had more touchdown receptions than him was Randy Moss.
Right.
So that's one that I thought I probably would have added Fitzgerald to this list, but he wasn't even on the practice squad here. They put AB, Antonio Brown, and Andre Johnson.
Antonio Brown, boy, I tell you, you talk about a player who was almost unguardable.
Unguardable, absolutely.
But he was such a headache.
Talk about off the field problems, right?
Right. And that probably will keep him out of the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, probably.
And either this year or next year, we have Frank Gore is going to be on the list. And Frank was never a top 5, he probably top 10, but a top 5 running back in a season, maybe once. But he just wore you down with 1,100 yards, 1,200 yards, 4.6. And Fitzgerald's the same way. I think they both might be number 2 all time, or is Gore number 3 in rushing and receiving yards. And Fitzgerald's a guy that, again, and he had a fantastic postseason run the one year. That's where I won't get too out of sorts, because we'll have Fitz be a candidate at the same time that Reggie Wayne is, and
yeah, we know how that's going to fall out. Right?
That's going to make me irritated for a couple of days. But yeah, but Jamar Chase isn't on the list of receivers, right?
No, yeah, they didn't even stash him on the practice squad here on this list.
But that just kind of shows you how the NFL. I realize this is the last 25 years. But receivers have just been – Reggie Wayne really not a sniff on that list, although he was
tremendous,
super productive. So, but again, and we'll get to a few more positions. But what's cool, and maybe they did this now because it's such a down period.
I think so.
And you always create controversy – not controversy, but conversation.
Yeah, get discussion going.
Which is the good thing. But a couple of these I just really thought rolled my eyes at.
And I'm not going to go position by position. I'm going to go with one more that we're gonna look at, mostly because it has a Colts bent to it. For edge rushers here, we got DeMarcus Ware, Jared Allen, Myles Garrett, Julius Peppers, and then on the practice squad they put T.J. Watt and Michael Strahan. I think there's a glaring omission there. Who had a horseshoe on his helmet?
Dwight Freeney, Hall of
Famer, Super Bowl winner. One of the metrics that they mentioned here was they really liked Jared Allen because he, forced a bunch of fumbles. Well, Freeney forced more fumbles than he did.
Yeah, don't make that argument and then have, by the way.
Right. Yeah, he had more. Allen had a few more, like 7 more career sacks than Dwight Freeney did. But if they're like, oh, we really like his forced fumbles, well, he had 36 and Dwight Freeney had 47.
Right. So, and Freeney goes to 3 Super Bowls, wins 1.
Right.
So, yeah, we've talked about this when it came time when Freeney went to Hall of Fame. Allen just went in this year, I think it was. But I was stunned the national perception of Dwight Freeney. Locally, we knew he was a really not really good, a great player. Nationally, he was considered a cut above. The reason he didn't go in earlier was because of, I think it was Julius Peppers.
Yeah, and Peppers' numbers are insane.
Right. So, but yeah, and there was one more position that I took exception to.
Go ahead, Mike.
Placekicker.
Oh yeah.
With Justin Tucker, who's got the all-time, let's forget about his off-field problems and the fact that he's not with the team, but all-time percentage, 89.1, I think it is. And that's great. But then Adam Vinatieri, he's the kicker on the 100 anniversary team. And 4 Super Bowls in most points regular season, most points postseason. So I don't know. And again, that's my Indy bias coming through. But
no, but he won 2 Super Bowls with New England off of his
at the gun,
foot,
right?
You know.
So and that yes, it's about longevity. It's about being effective and productive. It's about championships. It just is. So those are the ones that I would. Again, as much as I want to really pound the drum for Edgerrin, LT's omission is worse. I would put Freeney above Jared Allen. The other guys,
I mean, the Hall of Fame did, right?
Right. They were both eligible at the same time, and it is kind of crazy. I'd forgotten T.J. Watt. I mean, holy smokes!
Yeah, and J.J. Watt did make the list. He was on a special. Gosh, I forget what they called it. I am apologizing for scrolling here. I'm going to just do a little find and replace here.
Oh, I forgot. I put JJ over TJ. Yes.
Let's see. JJ Watt ended up there as a versatile defensive lineman. Is what the category that they put him in, and
it's like
hard to argue that he was not a versatile defensive lineman.
They thought, doggone, we left JJ Watt off this team.
Yeah. So T.J. Watt was stashed on the practice squad. J.J. Watt made it in kind of a hybrid category.
Right.
And so just an interesting list. I'll link it into the show notes so you guys can.
I think it's cool. It's cool, and it's a conversation piece, which is for the next month. That's what we're going to have.
Yeah, it's all we're going to have.
Right, so have at it, folks.
And you're gonna hear a lot of Pro Football Focus lists from us probably for the next couple of months. Well, anyway, that'll wrap up this edition of the Colts Blue Zone podcast. Dave Griffiths will return next week. Mike's going to take some time off, some well-deserved time off before the Colts start training camp. So for Dave Griffiths, Mike Chappell, and the Colts Blue Zone podcast, I'm Matt Adams. Thanks for listening.